We spoke yesterday about the shameful debate, if you can even call it that, in the House of Commons about the Telford, quote, inquiry. Just 9 MPs were present in the chamber, 6 Tories and 3 from the multitude of opposition parties, and they weren't exactly keen to speak candidly about who's doing all the raping of little English girls in Shropshire and up and down this land. Samantha Smith, who is one of the victims both of the persons in Telford who are partial to this sort of thing, and of the police and political indifference to what's being done to her. Samantha's back with us today. Samantha, do you feel that debate accomplished anything?
Well, I think that it's a very important debate that should have been had when every political correspondent and news channel wasn't focused on 10 Downing Street and Liz Truss's appointment. I want to give absolute credit to Lucy Allen, the MP for Telford, who has tirelessly campaigned for justice for victims, which couldn't be worlds apart from Telford and Wrekin Council, the Labour-led council, and her fellow MP Mark Pritchard for the Wrekin. But having a debate at 6:56 p.m. with 9 MPs in attendance on a Monday night when there's late voting anyway, and in the period where a new PM is getting appointed, practically guarantees that nobody's going to be tuning in and very few people are going to be attending.
Yeah, this is as basic as it gets, though, because you know, the numbers are horrifying. Telford isn't that big a town, and if over 1,000 girls can be the victims of these gangs in a place at Telford, you can't even begin to imagine the numbers that Birmingham or Manchester would be able to rack up if there was honest investigation of what's going on there. What in the end is the obstacle to actually lancing this boil on England and dealing with the issue?
Quite simply, it's institutional blindness. As you said, Telford is a very small town. It's been led by Labour leader Councillor Sean Davis since 2016, and yet they tried for years to block an independent inquiry. They said that it would cost too much money, that a national inquiry into child abuse in general would suffice, and that there simply wasn't a big enough issue with CSE in Telford to warrant an inquiry. It's the fact that local Labour leaders, that police services, social workers, schools, GPs, sexual health clinics spent decades turning a blind eye to little girls who were being systematically raped, groomed, abused and even murdered in some cases by predominantly Pakistani men. These are children being raped by adult men, and those in positions of power couldn't care less, because white working class girls predominantly are not seen as newsworthy, as worthy of justice, of support or of being believed. And this went on for decades.
Well, it's this hierarchy of victimhood that you seem to have in an identity group society, where, you know, if you're on the trans issue, for example, lesbians and feminists are being told, no, you come lower on the totem pole in the hierarchy of victimhood. And basically, it seems to be that if you're English working class girls, and the guys on the other end of the deal are, as you say, overwhelmingly Pakistani men, then you just institutionally don't rank as a victim group.
So Telford is quite a unique case in the fact that there were victims who were not just white working class girls. So there were girls that were African or Asian, but there is a very clear demographic that is largely falling victim to grooming gangs, and that's white working class girls, many of them in care, many of them under social services like I was, many who are vulnerable, who don't have adults that are looking out for them and that are looking out for their safety. And that's why these men are able to quite literally pick up girls from the police station after they've gone to report their rape, because those in positions of power turned a blind eye. It's much easier to blame the victims, to brand them child prostitutes or white slags, than to actually prosecute those responsible.
But you know, this all burst out into public. It's a decade ago now when the truth about Rotherham emerged, and it's got to be, I think, whatever it is now, 7-8 years since I first went to Rotherham and talked to these girls. And what's incredible to me is that after it all comes out, and after the Shame of Rotherham headlines on the Daily Mirror for a day or two, someone like you were then basically halfway through being abused, and the abuse still goes on, in your case, for years after it's made national headlines.
And this all comes down to the institutional blindness that I was talking about a moment ago. It's those in positions of power trying to sweep it under the rug and move on. You know, the leader of Telford and Wrekin Council, and I'm a big fan of naming and shaming. Councillor Sean Davis, who's been in power since 2016, he's been a councillor for 15 years, and is now the Labour leader of the local government association, which is very ironic considering he oversaw years. He is, yes.
So he does nothing. He does nothing about child gang rape in his town, and the Labour Party or whoever it is rewards him by making him the head of the local government association.
See, when everything came out about CSE and with the Telford independent inquiry into CSE, he liked to stress the fact that this happened 30 years ago, and he was only 3 years old at the time.
Wait a minute. How you aren't 30, so how the hell did it happen 30 years ago?
Exactly. They like to pretend that it's a crime of the past, that mistakes have been made and lessons have been learned, that this isn't something that goes on in towns like Telford anymore. But I can testify to the fact that this was going on long after they say that it stopped. And whether or not Councillor Sean Davis wants to pretend that this is a crime of the past is irrelevant, because I can say that girls in towns and cities across the country are still being raped, abused and groomed on a daily basis.
Well, I think we had a statement from the councils. I don't know what it is. Let me see if I can find it. It's not impressive.
Oh, well, I can tell you what it is.
Have you seen it?
In a very brief statement, which they issued, I believe, the day after the publication of the report. Councillor Sean Davis didn't put out a personal statement.
Oh, yeah.
He's usually very keen to stick his name on the end of anything to do with the council, but this came from the council in general. There was no name attributed to it. They said that the council was already carrying out many of the recommendations put in the report, that they apologised for the pain and the suffering of the victims without acknowledging any responsibility for decades' worth of incompetence and ignorance on the part of
Well, they've offered their thanks to, I'm just saying, together with Shropshire Council and the police, that's the useless West Mercia Constabulary, they should be disbanded, actually, because what they've done is, when you look at the reason they disbanded the Royal Ulster Constabulary, and then you look at what West Mercia did to these poor abused girls. We have publicly apologised wholeheartedly to the victims and offered our thanks for them for sharing their experiences with the inquiry. So that's great. They've offered their thanks to you for sharing your experience that went on for 10 bloody years in this evil dump of a town. Well,
it's frankly outrageous to me that they continue to refuse to accept responsibility for their failings. In the report, in the Crowther report into CSE in Telford, it was stated in no uncertain terms that progress had been unconscionably slow in Telford in implementing the recommendations of years of investigation into CSE. It's also been stated that the council was defensive and that they seemed unwilling to accept criticism, and that they had spent, they gave 1.2 million pages of documents to the inquiry to sift through. It felt very much like burying them in evidence to try.
That's the classic thing when you don't actually want to do anything. You just do a massive document dump. It
feels like a bad court show at times. And Telford and Wrekin Council, West Mercia Police, they spent years ignoring a problem that very much did not go away and still hasn't gone away. And now they like to pretend as though mistakes have been made and lessons have been learned, when the report stated in no uncertain terms that there's still systemic issues with tackling CSE in towns like Telford.
No, I can't get over it, because, as I said, it's like years and years ago now that I first met those first victims in Rotherham. Rotherham should have been the one town, and once that was on the front pages, this thing should have ended. And because of lousy councils, what's it called? Telford and Wrekin?
Telford and Wrekin Council.
Telford and Wrekin Council. You're right. We need to do more naming and shaming, and maybe we'll go through them all until this bloody disgrace that shames England stops. Thank you very much, Samantha. Samantha is incredible. If you knew 10% of what she's been through, you would be horrified that she's together enough to be sitting here and talking about baronesses who get kicked out of the cabinet. It would have finished anybody else off, and she's sticking with this thing very fiercely. This is a disgrace. We need to do something about it.